Today's video is going to be about pedals. How to use a pedal when writing music. I know, not gas pedals or pedals on a bicycle or guitar pedals, but compositional pedals. That's what we're talking about today. Welcome, everybody. Hey, I'm Schanno Johnson. If you don't know me, I'm a musician, composer, producer, and I make videos about all that fun stuff. Music composition, music production. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to see videos like this in the future. In music composition, there is something called a pedal, or a pedal point, or a pedal tone. The origin of this term comes from organ players, because on organ you literally have foot pedals that play notes. So as you're playing organ, you're not just playing with your fingers and your hands, you're also playing with your feet. There are even special organ shoes that one of my friends showed me at Berkeley, because they were a church organist and they had special organ shoes that gripped the right amount but also slipped around the right amount and were the right material so they didn't damage these wooden, often old organ pedals. So the origins of this is from organ. In music, a pedal is one note that's held throughout a section of music. So if you have a bass note that plays throughout a whole section of music for 16 measures, and then there's a bunch of other stuff on top of it, or even 8 measures, there's a bunch of stuff on top of it, and the chords change, but that pedal note doesn't, that's a pedal. Okay, so there are a couple different ways that you might see this in music. You might see it in a bass note. That's one of the most common, is you'll have a bass note that stays throughout the entire section of music, and the chords and music on top of it changes, right? That would be a bass pedal tone. Or you could have a pedal somewhere in the middle. That's pretty common for film music. All of these are pretty common in film music, let's be honest. But another one that's common is a pedal in the middle, and there's other stuff below and above it that changes, or there's a pedal that's higher up. A very common thing for like cinematic and very dramatic, often sad or very emotional scenes in film music is you have a high pedal point and then these chords that fade in and fade out, sort of swelling in and out around this one pedal tone. So basically a pedal or pedal point or pedal tone is just one repeated note that's held throughout an entire section. You can have chords that change above or below it, but that one note is still there. Another common thing that you'll hear in classical music or neoclassical heavy metal shredders is you'll hear one note that's played at the top repeatedly of a run. So they'll be playing a scale down or some scalar type of thing, and then playing this other note repeatedly over and over and over again. It's the heavy metal shredders use it because old classical composers used to use it, like you'll hear it in Bach's music and from that music from that time period. But those are a couple different examples of how you can, or how you might hear a pedal in a piece of music. Is high up, cinematic film music, in the middle, also used for film music, and then low pedal, very common in organ music, especially from Bach's time period. Bach played the organ, right? So he would have used a lot of this. Also very common in horror or thriller soundtracks, where you have this really low bass, like boom rumble thing as a note, and then you'll have these other stuff, other chords and textures or whatever on top of it moving around. It creates a really, really dramatic and like tense feeling when you do it with orchestra, especially strings and an electronic bass or something. Let's get into some ideas with writing pedals. So the first thing we're going to talk about is using a pedal in the bass. So if you have a bass tone, one pedal, playing throughout a whole section, maybe 8 measures or 16 measures or something, on top of it, one way that you can start getting used to this by writing a chord progression on top of it. Now remember, as you're doing this, not all the chords are going to have that note in them, right? If you have a G pedal and on top of it you have an F major chord and then an E minor chord, and then you have a C major chord and an A minor chord, those chords, not all of them have G in them. F major doesn't have G in it, E minor does, C major has a G in it, but A minor doesn't have a G in it. A minor 7 does, but we're not going to get into that right now. So you're going to create these different textures, different amounts of tension, you can think of it as, by shifting these chords around. And it's something that film composers do all the time because it's a great way to keep some type of forward momentum and be able to really control the amount of tension that you're using without going super crazy with busy textures or with harmonic chords that are sort of very far out of the key, right? You can really change the small amounts of tension and get a finer like level or gradient of tension as you write this piece of music. So if we do that, you can change the chords on top to create more tension. Now, how do you know which chords are more tense or less tense than others? Well, this one is pretty simple. Just look at which chords have or don't have that note. For example, an E minor chord with a G in the bass, not going to have a whole lot of tension because E minor has a G in it. But if you have an F chord, there's going to be a little bit more tension because F doesn't have a G in it anywhere. And if it did, it would be an add 9 chord. Now, not a tense chord played that way, but the reverse with the 9 in the bass, yeah, it's going to sound more tense. You could also do it by playing something like a D minor. That D minor doesn't have any G in it. If it did, it would be an 11th, but in the context of a pedal, there's no G in a D minor triad. So that's going to have a little bit more tension. You could even go, a little bit farther in getting a little bit more tension and play like an F sharp major chord over that G. That's going to be a lot more tension because G to F sharp is a major 7th. And if F sharp major had a G in it, it would be the flat 9, which is a very harsh note, a very harsh tension to be playing with that chord. So change around the chords, play with them, see what sounds good, what sounds a little bit more tense, what you like, what you don't like. That way you can sort of get an idea of how you can dial in the amount of tension that you want using this pedal tone. Okay, let's say you're doing the same idea, but the pedal is somewhere in the middle range, somewhere around middle C. Let's say we have a middle C pedal. Why not? Let's say we have our pedal on middle C and we're playing in B flat major. The way that you can sort of dial in the tension there is, again, change around the chords that you have and see how they sound. But that's going to be a little different because you're not thinking about this pedal as the interval from the pedal up to the chord. You're going to have to think about what the chord is, including the pedal, right? If you have a C pedal in B flat major and you play a B flat chord, that'll make a B flat add 9 chord. If we change that to a minor chord, B flat minor, we'll have a B flat minor add 9 chord. And those are going to have two different sounds. It's going to be a different way of thinking about where the tension is. If you played a G major chord with C as a pedal, that might sound a little harsh because you're going to have a half step between B and C and then a whole step from C to D. So it's going to sound a little clustery. If you had, a B major chord with a C pedal, that's going to sound really harsh because you have B major with a flat 9, right? As you're shifting around these chords, you could shift them around to create more or less tension. As you're shifting around these notes, check what amount of tension you want, what amount of tension you don't want. But it can be an interesting way to write your chords and think about chordal writing a little differently because you're not thinking what chord progression you want necessarily. You're thinking, how do these chords work with this other added note going throughout them? And you don't necessarily have to stay within one major scale. You don't have to stay all diatonic chords to B flat major because you have this one C note playing throughout all of them, or whatever your pedal is, and that can allow you to have a little bit more freedom because those other chords will sound more related because you have this continuity of that C pedal. That C pedal sort of ties all the chords together in a way that you don't normally get if you just have a chord progression. So as you're writing this, experiment with what sounds you like, what sounds you don't like, because it can get you some more interesting sounds than just writing chord progression after chord progression after chord progression. It can get you a little bit more interesting chords, maybe a little bit more interesting of a sound as you're writing. Another thing to think about when writing with a pedal in some middle range is how close together all of the notes are, right? If you have a C pedal and you play a B flat major chord, you're gonna have a whole step, 2 whole steps within your chord that is gonna be heard, right? A whole step from B flat to C, whole step from C to D. But if you write a C minor chord with that same pedal, you won't have any close intervals. You'll just have C to E flat as your smallest interval. I think that's a sound that can sound really interesting, and I think it's one of the things that makes writing with a pedal so interesting is you have this sort of push and pull of tension a lot. It's a different type of tension that you don't often hear unless it's in a film soundtrack. Another way that you can write a pedal is the high pedal. This, you kind of have to have the same considerations as if it's a middle pedal, but you're really thinking what extension, what tension of the chord is it. If it's, a C pedal again, and you put a B flat chord, that's going to sound like a 9. And if you have a A minor chord, it's going to sound like a 3rd. If you have a G major chord, it's going to sound like a 4th. You're going to have a flat 9 from B up to C. And it's all something to think about as you're writing this music is what level of tension do I want, and how specifically do I want to write that tension. If you want a really crunchy chord, then have a C pedal and put a B underneath it, or put a D flat major underneath it. It will sound really pretty because that top C, the pedal, will be a major 7th. So it'll make a major 7 chord, D flat major 7 chord. So as you're writing, sort of consider what amount of tension you want, what amount of tension do you not want, as you're thinking about these pedals. Another way you can do this, especially with a low pedal, is you accent different notes within the scale as you're playing it. So it's a fun exercise to do on guitar or piano. I imagine violin. I've never done it on violin, but it could also be fun to do it on there. Is you experiment with what scales and scale degrees, what do they sound like over this pedal? So if you have, for example, on guitar, you have an E pedal and you're playing an E minor chord or an E minor scale on top of it, you can hear all of these different scale degrees on top of 1. The 4th scale degree, what does that sound like against 1? What does the 7th scale degree sound like against 1? And you can sort of do the same thing where you're dialing in the amount of tension, but you're also experimenting with landing on different scale degrees and sort of creating that as a chord almost, that as your sound of these two notes combined together. It's another interesting way you can use pedals in your writing. It can give you a little bit different of a sound if you've never done it before, so it's fun to play around with. As you're writing these pieces with pedals and everything, another thing to consider while you're writing is tension and release. How much tension do you have, and when is it being released? Are you building up tension, or are you releasing tension? If you listen to a lot of film soundtracks, they'll sort of have this ebb and flow, push-pull of tension and release, right? They'll build up tension toward a specific scene and then release that tension within that scene or after it or something. So you'll be hearing chords that get maybe a little bit more tense and then resolve to a chord that's less tense. And you're not really thinking about Roman numeral analysis or Roman numerals of the chords that you're playing. You're more thinking how crunchy they are against your pedal. I know that's a weird way of saying it, but how much tension is there with the pedal, right? If you're playing in E minor and you have an E minor pedal, E minor is not going to be very tense. It's going to be pretty stable. But if you're moving that chord around and you have an E pedal and you play a B dominant 7 chord, that's going to be a little bit more tense. Now it is 5/7 in E, but if you have that chord, that's going to sound a little bit more tense. Same thing with a G major chord, is going to be slightly more tense than E. Not a whole lot more tension there, but it's going to be slight difference in tension. If you go to A minor, again, a little bit more tension, building up tension a little bit more. If you go to D major, that's going to maybe have a weird sense of tension and not tension because you have the major chord, but it's not 1, and it doesn't have an E in it. So over that E pedal, you're going to have a very interesting sound, right? Same thing if you go to a G sharp major chord. The G sharp major over E is going to have kind of a lot of tension because the total chords it makes is an E augmented with a major 7. So that's going to add more tension to this piece that you're writing, right? So experiment around with those chords, right? How does F sharp minor sound? That one's going to have a little bit more tension because it's going to sound like you're kind of building because you're moving away from 1. You're moving away from E, the home root chord, but that chord doesn't have an E in it. It does make an F sharp minor 7 chord, but still having that 7th in the bass rather than an F sharp in the bass is going to sound very different, especially if you're using this pedal technique. So sort of, you can build tension and release tension in different ways than just going back to 1 and the standard resolutions, right? Because a 4 minor, A minor in E is going to sound kind of resolved a little bit in this technique of style of writing, because you're not resolving to 1 all the time. You have that pedal. That's going to sound the most resolved, but that one's going to sound a little bit more resolved because it has E in it. And you're going to create tension in different ways than just thinking, okay, how do I build up to a 5-1? How do I build up to a 4-1? Or whatever standard resolution you're thinking of, because you're thinking tension release rather than, just resolution back to 1, 5-1, 4-1. You're not thinking the same standard resolutions. You're thinking about this different idea of just pure tension, right? Just different combinations of notes being tense or being a little bit more resolved. So try it in your writing. If you're a piano player and you've never done it, try it with a string patch on piano. Right away you'll be like, oh my God, I can write film music now. Yeah, I'm a film composer. Because it's so common in film music to use pedals in this way. And as you play around with it, you'll get an idea of the common chord progressions and common ways to release tension that film composers use. So give it a try. That's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something about music. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.